Everybody wants to know the reason of death. We know that at some point something happens and our life as we know it ends. We fear it, we hide from it, so we rather create and tell stories about life after death and constantly dream about immortality. Now, there are of course whole religions and philosophies based on this so-called mystery. But what happens exactly? What is the real reason of death? Why do we have to die? In this video, we are going to tell you what the simple and perhaps quite disappointing reason of death is. We are curious, we are looking for the reasons, we want to find the truth. But we tend to forget that truth starts with ourselves. Look behind the mirror and find the path. One of the main reasons why we do not understand what death is the ambiguous meaning of the concept itself. If you're a true Christian like Pope Francis, or a true materialist like Richard Dawkins, the meaning of death becomes quite different for you. If you believe that you have a personal soul that was created in the image of God, then both your birth and death is only a small stage and not a real start or end in a much bigger process. Your soul is eternal, and death is only a gate into a better life in heaven. The only reason you can't end the misery of life whenever you want is that then you would go into hell. God is a real playmaker. But our point is that in this religious case, the reason of death is clear. The fall of man, death and other earthly sufferings are the punishments of Adam's and Eve's defiance of the will of God, and now we have to find our way back into heaven in these cruel circumstances. If you believe in turn that we are built as gene machines and cultured as meme machines, that they are our creators as Dawkins calls them, and we are just soulless, empty machines controlled by the genes, then your death is, in fact, only a subjective illusion, the byproduct of the objective process of the natural selection of genes, and has no real meaning at all. Genes sometimes change their host machines, which you subjectively perceive as birth and death, but the real objective entities do not born or die, they only mutate and perhaps become victims of natural selection. If you're a consequent materialist, there is no essential difference between the state you subjectively perceive as life and the other state you perceive as your death. The creators of the machine will survive. Yet, this scientific understanding of the process sheds light on another important reason why we do not understand the real reason of death, since in this concept there is a real difference between natural death by aging and violent death by, for example, a predator. If you have an eternal soul in the image of God, then it doesn't matter at all that you die in bed or at the cross, for instance. You'll find yourself in heaven for sure if you've lived a pious life. However, the violent end of a gene type or lineage by a predator could end the objective process of genes forever, while natural death by aging is quite a different thing that usually happens after the successful and multiple reproduction of the given gene type or lineage. Moreover, if we do not regard living beings as simple gene machines, but acknowledge the reality of free will and the individual personality of living beings, then usually the natural death of living beings literally means their success in life, because by their decisions and efforts in life, they had given birth to the next generation of their kind. Therefore, however strange it may seem, natural death is both a subjective individual tragedy and an objective sign of success of the given lineage at the same time. But why the hell do we have to die for the success of our kind? The reason is, in fact, pretty simple. Sexuality. Yes, natural death is nothing else but the price of sex. Sexuality is perhaps the most widespread and most successful form of biological adaptation in evolution. Almost all advanced life forms on Earth are sexual, because although it needs serious resources and time to make it work, as we all know very well, its outcomes are highly beneficial for any sexual group. Perhaps the two most important advantages of sexuality are the fast spread of favorable mutations and traits in the sexual group due to the fact that a sexual descendant inherits genes from both of his parents and thus from his grandparents and great-grandparents and so on, and the common gene pool itself that can contain more genetic information by orders of magnitude than the genome of a single lonely asexual living being. A lonely asexual living being can inherit only the genetic information of his also lonely parent, which, as a matter of fact, is exactly the same as his own. And here lies the answer why, contrary to us, primitive asexual living beings do not die and even do not age. It would be utterly meaningless and the end of the whole lineage itself. Although real sexuality develops only at higher levels, for the sake of simplicity, imagine an asexual and a sexual primitive unicellular living being. The reproduction of the asexual living being is done by simple cell division. Call the original asexual living being A as Adam. After the division, there will be two genetically perfectly identical living beings. Now ask, who is the parent? Or with other words, which one is Adam? The answer is that in a sense both of them, and in another sense none of them. Both of them because they are not just perfectly identical with each other, but with Adam too. And neither of them because none of them is the original Adam intact of the cell division, as would be the case in real sexual reproduction. As a matter of fact, our words parent and children, or even descendant, are only really meaningful in case of sexual reproduction, the context of which these concepts were created in. However, in asexual reproduction, the descendants themselves are not even real descendants, but rather the forever living parent itself in many identical copies. Okay, so asexual living beings live forever, or at least do not die a natural death. But why on earth do the successful sexual parents have to die? The simple fact is that otherwise the huge advantages of sexuality over asexual reproduction could not be realized. The common gene pool and the fast spread of favorable traits over generations, thus the fast and resilient adaptation of the sexual group to its environment, would be lost if there wasn't enough living space for the next generations by which the sexual group maintains and renews itself from time to time. The resources of a given niche are usually quite constant, therefore there would be no room for the next generation if the older generations would stay alive. With other words, practically infinite resources would be needed to maintain a sexual group without natural aging and death. There are other factors, especially at higher levels of course, but the fundamental reason of natural death is sexuality. Sex leads to death, which is a well-known fact in biology at least for a century. Perhaps one of the reasons that it is less known in the public is that in the mainstream materialist understanding of evolution, the difference between the life and death of an individual person is blurred for the sake of the subjective processes of genes, so both the real reason and meaning of the death of an individual person get lost. However, in this sense, the traditional Christian understanding of the process is more telling. We, as real individuals with real choices and responsibilities, are part of a greater process going way beyond us, and we have to suffer and die for the success of our kind because our eternal life lies in the blood and soul of our children. In this video, we have taken a look at the mystery of death, and we have found that it has a simple, perhaps quite disappointing reason: sexuality. Primitive, asexual living beings do not die naturally, they remain identical over many subsequent generations, while the huge evolutionary advantages of sexuality have a cruel price for the individuals. They have to die for the success of their sexual group. Next time, we will look into the mystery of time travel, one of the favorite topics of science fiction. Is it really possible that someday someone will construct a time machine and go back in time to see the Battle of Waterloo? As a matter of fact, based on hard evidence, we have a clear answer to this fascinating problem. If you liked it, please leave a like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and remember, always look behind the mirror.